Hey everyone, this is Dylan coming at you from MetaManiacs with a pretty sweet deck profile. I promised you guys a long time ago to bring the to get into more detail on the deck that I was playing in the recent RVA sort of local online casual event with John Schreiner, Adam Duncan, and Chris Adams. It was a great time. It was played over Zoom. We played with analog cards. And I said that I had mentioned my kind of backup destruction deck, and this is it. So I would say this is about as control-y as you get with as far as Final Fantasy goes. And yeah, so let's get right into it. I've dubbed this deck No Friends, as you can see. It's a great time. It's super fun, super consistent, I've found. I think there's probably a few things that can be tweaked in it, but we'll get into that afterwards. But before really diving into it, I want to remind everybody to, if you like this stuff, be sure to subscribe. It does us a lot of good. It helps us, the community, everybody grow, and you know, the more people see you, the better too. You know, give it a like as well for those YouTube analytics. If you dislike it, dislike it. But if you liked it, please send us a like. So, all right. So I'm in here with my No Friends deck list. It's a deck that revolves around Mandragora. Mandragora is a monster. An Earth monster from the most recent set, Opus 11. When an Earth character other than Mandragora enters the field, place one counter on Mandragora. You can put Mandragora into the break zone to choose one backup of cost 5 or more to break it. You can put it in the break zone with 3 counters though, and you can break any backup, so it's super strong. Counters were added in the most recent Opus. The way Mandragora works is it gets a counter each time an Earth character enters the field. Now, that's good and fine, but it's not really super broken until you're playing it for an incredibly efficient cost. And this gem, Relm, does that for you. Relm, as you can see, is water. She's not Earth, so we'll have some color fixing coming up. But when Relm enters the field, you may search up for up to 1 monster of cost 1 and 1 monster of cost 2, and play them onto the field. And at the end of each of your turn, choose 1 forward opponent controls. If you control 5 or more monsters, return it to its owner's hand. So the bounce effect that she has is sort of a secondary thing. I actually kind of forget that it's even there most of the time. She's just crazy. The CP that you plus from just playing her onto the field is what's really benefiting you. So, obviously, we've got a few monsters. There are exactly 2 monsters that you can choose with her. So we have Mandragora, which I had already covered, and Flandit. Flandit is an older card that's seen some niche play in a few tax decks. This is very reminiscent to the tax formula. Flandit is seen in pretty much every tax deck, generally alongside Flan in Ice, but this time we're just playing at Earth. So Flandit, choose 1 forward opponent controls. If you tap it, choose 1 forward opponent controls. If your opponent doesn't pay 1, it cannot attack or block this turn. So that's already good when your opponent has backups, but it's much better when they don't have backups. So obviously, the synergy with Mandragora and Flandit is right there. If they don't have backups because you breaking them with Mandragora, or you also have Hecatoncheir to break backups of 3 or more, Flandit is obviously that much stronger because they have to discard from hand in order to actually attack or block. And you know, as soon as you say no to your opponent attacking or blocking, you can kind of set the pace of the game. So a lot of the times you're going to want to play, you're going to search your deck for a Flandit and a Mandragora off of your play of Relm. A lot of newer players, or a lot of people who start, will throw Relm down turn 1 and get a Mandragora and Flandit out, and that's great. But the real top tier turn 1 play is Tyro into Relm, into Flandit, into Mandragora, and I'll elaborate on that and actually just right now. So obviously starting out with backups is a good way to start, and Tyro is one of the best backups in the game. Especially, again, from the most recent Opus, which really made it so that you could really play this deck. Tyro comes in, he's got an EX burst, he costs 5, and when he enters the field, you may search up to 1 forward and add it to your hand. If Tyro's on the field, he can produce CP of any element. So, not only does he color correct for you, and being able to play your fire, your water, your ice, and obviously your earth, but he searches for the forward that you're hoping to play right away, which is Relm. So if you can turn 1 Tyro and set yourself up to play Relm turn 2 on curve and into Mandragora and Flandit, the rest of it kind of spells itself. Where if you have turn 2, you've got Tyro out, Relm out, Mandragora, and Flandit. Tyro setting you up for the rest of the game in color correction. Relm has set you up with a Flandit and a Mandragora. It's really pretty hard for your opponent to come back from that strong of a swing. And a lot of the times people will try to overcommit in order to really get in front of you. But if they're overcommitting with forwards, Flandit kind of slows that down. If they're overcommitting with backups, Mandragora is there to punish them for that too. This is a deck that really benefits from knowing what to play and when to play it, and the more reps you have on the deck, as with any control deck, the better it'll get. So, now that we've talked about the main engine, which is Relm, Flandit, Mandragora, and we've mentioned the strongest support and Tyro, let's talk about some of the weaknesses. Early, if you brick, it's going to be hard for you, because there is a lot of board wipe in the deck, but if you're not getting ahead of your opponent and playing the right cards when you have the right ability to, there's Sora talking in the background, it gets a little muddled up and it gets harder. But you've got a lot of comeback tools in it, so I would say that early aggression is really hard for you. Well, how do you stave off aggression? Well, I've got Cloud of Darkness, Shantoto, Braska's Final Aeon, and Vayne, all as options to kind of either bounce back, stop them, or heavy cards that they have to answer right away. So I would consider a lot of reset buttons. You also have a high amount of EX bursts in 12, so you've got a pretty decent amount of EX bursts, not super high, but you've got EX bursts that find you things. Tyro finds you a forward, Thornton finds you a card, Kusith finds you a card from your break zone. A lot of these, Gabranth again finds you a forward of 5 or higher, which most of your forwards are. All of these experts are there to add things to your hand, toolbox you, and really get you back into the game to where you need to be. And at the worst, they're plussing CP, and plussing CP is always good, and especially in a game of attrition, which is what you're trying to do. So, along with that, let's talk about our reset cards. Cloud of Darkness. She's probably the weaker of them, but she's still a really good filler, in that when she enters the field, each player selects 1 forward they control. All forwards that weren't selected get put into the break zone. So like Veritas of the Dark, which is another card that I'm sure you guys understand, and if you're not newer, I'll go into quick detail. It's each player selects 1 forward. So it's not choose, it gets around all sorts of spells. It gets around Braska's Final Aeon's chosen ability. It gets around anything that would say that it cancels a choose. So you don't have to select Cloud of Darkness as the one that you want to keep. You can play her onto a field where your opponent has a super wide board and you want to just keep your Braska's Final Aeon. You can do that. So it helps reset and even the board. And again, when you're resetting the board, you're going to be ahead on backups. They're going to be behind on backups. each time you can do that is another nail on their coffin in this deck. So, Cloud of Darkness, one of the weaker ones, at 6 cost, but she's got a really strong effect. After that, you've got Shantoto, Old Faithful. When she enters the field, she gains every element. So again, another, to go back to Tyro, the color correction that Shantoto provides is an incredible secondary to the board wipe effect that he has when it enters the field. I'm not sure if Shantoto's a she or a he, but she's cute, so I think it's she. So when she enters the field, she removes all forwards from the game. You're not playing an incredible amount of forwards in this deck. At 19 forwards, generally, I would say an average is like 24-ish, 24 to 26. Some decks play as much as 30. Birds play more than that. At 19, you're pretty behind. So generally, you're going to benefit on this more than they are. And again, if you're resetting the board, you're ahead on backups. You have backup destruction. You have all sorts of ways to kind of really dig in these board wipes and really push it into your favor. So Shantoto is another one. I would say Shantoto is probably the best and most versatile. You have ways to remove Shantoto with a Vincent, which again is another combat card, but Vincent can throw a backup away when he enters the field. And Undead Princess, obviously, when she's in the break zone, she can come back into play if you break 2 Earth backups, and Shantoto is Earth. So you've got ways to make that happen. You can also just break your own Shantoto Tekatonka, even though that seems incredibly expensive. And Mandragora can also just break your own Shantoto if you want to at any point in time. So let's say you've got a Mandragora out and somehow your opponent floods the field with some Turbo Ice build or some crazy cost reduction with Rain. You can use Mandragora, pop it, and pop your Shantoto, play Shantoto again. It's really cool, and again, you see a lot more of these lines as you play. So Shantoto, great card. There's a reason it's been a legend, and it's a legend and why it's been in pretty much every Earth deck since Opus 1 when it was printed. It's an incredible card. So after Shantoto and Cloud of Darkness, we've got Vayne. Vayne in this deck is just, he's really good. Vayne, so let's read him real quick. So he's a 5 CP ice forward. There's not many ice forwards in this deck. I think Vayne is actually the only ice card in the entire deck, so that's where the color correcting comes in. But Vayne basically adds text to your opponent's forward, saying all forwards opponent control gain at the end of your turn. If you don't pay 1, break this forward. So that's obviously good, right? If he survives, your opponent is forced to pay 1 at the end of each turn if they want to keep their forwards. If not, their forwards are going. And I mean, that's obviously his opportunity cost, 5 for 9. He's pretty on curve. He's a pretty strong forward. Other than that, but your opponents, if they don't answer him right away, they're really in for a bad time. Especially again when you're taxing them with Flandit and you're breaking their backups. Vayne just acts as a recurring forward that they have to answer, and if they don't answer, they lose. So in terms of versatility, though, Vayne is pretty cool. Now, this deck has a lot of ways to kind of sneak him onto the board, and I would say his biggest weakness is like he has to survive full turn, your turn, and your opponent's draw phase. You know, they get to see every answer they possibly can come up with to get rid of him. And a good player always, you know, tries to have an answer for like the worst case scenario card. Vayne tends to be that card. So you can sneak him in a lot of the times after really taxing your opponent to just gut punch them and wipe their board. If you watch the RVA broadcast on Twitch a couple weeks ago, or I said a month ago or so, you'll see that I did it, three times on stream. It's obviously good, and there's obvious ways to get it, and there's some not so obvious ways to get it. Let's look into those real quick. So Vayne synergies. Tama, obvious synergy in that you pay X, put her into the break zone, play one character of cost X or less from your hand onto the field. So the X is colorless, so you can play Vayne regardless. Doesn't matter if it's ice, doesn't matter if it's fire. You can play any character as long as the cost is X or less. So Tama also pseudo color corrects for you, but so you can do this at any point in time. You can do this at your opponent's end step. You can do it in combat if you want to. But generally, you're going to be using Tama to bring in Vayne after you've flanded the crap out of your opponent and they have less cards in hand, and you've really taxed them into going, oh, well, now I either lose my entire hand or I lose my field or I lose one forward. You know, if you're killing a forward playing Vayne, you know, you're already getting more out of him than you probably were just playing him plain and hoping that he lives. So Tama allows you to do that. Another card that allows you to do that, which is actually one of my favorite cards in this deck, and now it doesn't allow you to flash him in like Tama does, but Chaos. Chaos really allows you to, he's basically Vayne copy number 4, and that you can play any forward of cost 5 or more, but I think Vayne and Relm are the ones to grab, especially if you have more monsters for Relm to benefit off of, because the more times you can play Vayne on the field, you know, eventually your opponent's running out of destruction, unless they're mono fire. So their forward removal tends to lessen, and Chaos is great. Now that we're, you know, kind of moving off the Vayne train, let's move into Chaos, since I just mentioned him real quick. When he enters the field, choose one forward of cost 5 or more in your break zone. You may pay X. When you do so, if its cost is that what you paid, play it onto the field. So, as with everything, you can always overpay by 1. But you can play Vayne, you can play Relm, you can play Cloud of Darkness, you can play Braskus, Gao. They're all great options. We'll cover the other options in a second after I finish the second ability, which is you may pay 3 of any color, tap him, remove him from the game, choose one character opponent controls, remove him from the game. Generally, I use this as spot removal. Again, eventually your opponent's running out of resources, but I also use it a lot of the times. It's kind of clutch in a Ran pair matchup to remove their Ran pair from the game instead of allowing them to play it, whereas your other options, you know, your other backup destruction options end up breaking it, so triggering Ran pair. But Chaos has got some really cool features, and it's really matchup dependent. But generally, removing their best forward, you know, is the way to go. Okay, so now that I've given you the main toolbox of the deck, the main answers that you have for responding, let's talk about some consistency cards, and then we'll go over just the rest of the list. You've got Kusith, brings forwards or backups from your break zone to your hand. You also have Bonga, brings an Earth character in your break zone back to your hand. A lot of the times, your Shantoto might be a little too expensive early. Well, Bonga gets back to your hand. Minfilia, up to 2 characters in your break zone when she enters the field, back to your hand. She also has a light or dark character break it on her, which is incredibly strong, you know, due to Kadaj right now. But so there's a lot of consistency cards in, you know, Minfilia, Bonga, Kusith, Tama, Chaos. Sorry, not so much Tama, but Chaos. In getting things back from your break zone that you've seen already, which is, you know, obviously one of Earth's greatest strengths is the recursion. You have Aparuru, which is obviously really strong as well. Gets a character back from your break zone, is reduced by each backup you control. Super good. Larcacus gets a monster back from your break zone, adds it to your hand. You know, and so using Larcacus to loop your Mandragoras, your Flandets is super strong. Something that I actually forgot, let's touch this real quick. Relm. I should have mentioned this earlier, but when Relm enters the field, you choose up to 2. So you get a Mandragora and a Flandet. Let's say that's the best case scenario. You get both of the things that you wanted. You can choose which one enters the field at each time. So you go, okay, I've got Mandragora and I've got Flandet. Well, I want my Mandragora to enter the field first, so that when my Flandit enters the field, my Mandragora sees that an Earth character is entering the field. Thus, your Mandragora is starting with one counter on it already. So you're already kind of turboing the speed. You're skipping a step almost if you play Flandit and Mandragora with Relm, because you can have, again, you have your Mandragora enter first, Flandit enters, Mandragora sees the Flandit, gets a counter. It's kind of dirty, but it's super good. Also, so once that's mentioned, we'll go back to the consistency thing real quick. Luminous Puma, one of the strongest consistency cards in the game. Okay, now, Gao. When Gao enters the field, he plays a monster of cost 2 or less and he breaks down onto the field. It's great for those early Flandits that you discarded, which are generally something you shouldn't do, but it's super clutch to bring back Mandragora. You play Mandragora 3 or 4 times on an opponent, and since the max backups currently is 5, if you've broken 4 out of the 5 backups that they've played, if they've even played 5, you're pretty ahead. So, more ways to recur that. Also, he gains plus 1,000 power for each monster you control. As you can see, we have 9 total monsters. It says that, yeah, we have 9 total monsters, all of which are standard units, so you can technically have a beefy Gao. But a lot of the times, Gao will become a 5-drop 9k, play a Mandragora 10k. If you have Gigas, maybe 11. Generally like 5-drop 9 or 10k is where he'll sit in this deck, which is, a 5-drop 10k is fine by me. And playing backups that break backups are great. So Gao is super strong because most of your monsters can stay around as long as you want them. Let's go left to right. Since I feel like I've kind of touched most of the things, we'll just mention some quick toolbox things. Undead Princess, she's great for taxing your opponent more. When she enters the field, choose a forward. If your opponent doesn't pay 3, it can't attack or block this turn. It's just a Flandit on steroids. And when it enters the field, so you can bring it back from the break zone, breaking 2 Earth backups. A lot of the times, your Bongas end up clogging your field for space for a Shantoto or for a Tyro if you haven't already played it, stuff like that. It's an all-around good card. Vincent, of all the cards in this deck, Vincent isn't one that I feel like has to be in here, but spot removal is good, and again, clearing up a backup is also good. He's at 1. He's kind of a swing card, but 3-drop 7k. When you enter the field, you may put a backup you control in the break zone. When you do so, choose a dull forward, deal it 8,000 damage. Larcacus, we've mentioned. He recurs your monsters that are in your break zone. He recurs dead Mandragoras that you've popped for something. He recurs a Luminous Puma to make that loop happen. He recurs Gigases if you need just beefy forwards sitting on the field. Larcacus is great, and he has a search for a monster ability which can really ramp your Flandits or your Mandragoras if you have the resources to do so. Gabranth, one of the best legends of the game. He's just hyper consistent. His special ability is great. He searches for a forward of 5 or more, and at 6 he gets bigger, and at 6 points of damage he gets bigger and brave. He kind of spells himself. Gao we kind of talked on. His special ability will almost never come into play because you're just going to want to play Gao again. But Vayne, we've talked about him, kind of covered him. Relm, Cloud of Darkness, again, we've talked about them. Vraska's Final Aeon, one of the strongest legends that Fire's ever had printed. When he enters the field, when he's chosen or when he attacks, he chooses a forward and deals it 10,000 damage. There's no way to get around this. And there's no summoners in this deck, so Vraska's just doing that. But he's going to deal 10k every time he's chosen, every time he attacks. He's just a huge forward that your opponent has to answer. That ends up being a big wall. And because you have Tyro and Shantoto and Tama, you can play these niche cards that you don't have other elements of. Kusith, we've talked about it, chooses a forward in your break zone.
Forward backup, adds to your hand. Great card. Hecatoncheir. I touched on this briefly, but it's just another backup destruction card. Gigas, we didn't mention this, but we'll talk about it now. You pay 0, so it's basically just an activate, but until the end of turn, he becomes a forward, and when he attacks, he doesn't activate during your next phase. You can only use it once per turn. So you turn him into a forward with 9,000 power. So he's a 4,000 or 4 cost 9k forward effectively that can get around a lot of interaction. Like there's Kadaj, where you know, he has all these enter abilities, and you can kind of be like, well, he's got a spell shield until I want him to block or I want him to attack. Also, Gigas, if you haven't activated him yet, and he's still a monster, he gets around Cloud of Darkness and gets around Shantoto. And so if you wipe the board, but you still have a Gigas on the field, you can, in your attack phase, activate Gigas, attack on a cleared board. So that's, you know, a really good synergy of him. He's a standard unit, so you have him at 2. He's above curve. He effectively dulls and freezes himself if he attacks, but I think he's, you know, worth a spot, especially since you have so much Monster Kit and Larcacus to really bring him back. Luminous Puma. When it enters the field, you choose a forward in your break zone, you add it to your hand. When you break it, you choose a forward or backup, add it to your hand. So it's just one of those hyper consistent cards that is a little hard to play, a little hard to swallow early game, but he can really do some disgusting things late game to really grab you the thing that you absolutely need to push the game in your favor. A lot of the times people ask me, do I deck out? Do I da-da-da? Well, even though there's a lot of EXs, a lot of the stuff comes from the break zone. And I find my opponent searching a lot more than me. And I don't really find deck out to be too big of an issue with this deck. Eventually your opponent decks out, or you just have starved them so much of resources that you're just ahead in every way. Even if you take some damage early, like you really come back pretty strong. Tomo, we've mentioned. Bonga, we've mentioned. Thordan, just 5-drop water. When he enters a field, search for a card, add it to your hand. Search for one card, so you have to reveal it to your opponent. But cool thing about Thordan, obviously the best thing about Thordan is he searches for Relm if you play him turn 1. And then you're set up to play Relm turn 2. But other things, there's some smaller synergies with Vincent. Vincent breaks a backup when he enters the field. If you break it back with Thordan, you draw a card. So when Thordan's put in the break zone, you draw a card. Undead Princess, if you don't break Thordan, because you can't break Thordan with Undead Princess, but it's just that little Vincent thing. There are other things that have breakup. You can break it back up with Hecatoncheir or Mandragora to draw a card. Again, like we mentioned with Shantoto before, just to really clear up that spot if you want to draw a card. So Mandragora ends up being like, you know, draw a card. Tyro, Minfilia, Aparudu, Shantoto, we've kind of covered. So, yeah, I would say that if we're talking about strengths and weaknesses, this deck's pretty well rounded, and it's generally about as good as its pilot. And I'm not going to say that like I'm not an incredible deck builder, but from what I've seen out of this, I've really, really liked it. I think it is definitely a hardcore playable deck. You can bring it to most events if you have a lot of reps on it and do very well. Yeah, so before I wrap up, I want to say a few things. We've got, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Feel free to hit me up on MetaManiacs on Facebook, or of course my personal Facebook profile at Dillan Straby on Facebook. I'm currently I'm currently sponsored by Legendary Wolf Games. Send them all your love, all the vibes you can, because everybody's getting hit hard during these trying times. So if you can purchase singles boxes on LWG, that would mean a lot to me, and obviously the guys over there too. I plan to have weekly Final Fantasy content coming through MetaManiacs,
every Friday. I will do my damnedest to make that happen. I will also be joining a podcast with MetaManiacs to sit down and really talk about how things are going. Let's highlight Relm while we're talking. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear it in the comments. Sit it down there. First video in the new location, so not everything's perfect, but doing our best. One more shout out, RVA Returners. Again, RVA Returners podcast. They have the RVA Online Weeklies, which I would say is by far, bar none, the best weekly online tournament that you can join. They have games sponsored by other online dealers. You can get sleeves, get promos, earn all the stuff that you could in your locals that you obviously can't go to right now. It's a great time. But before I leave, I've got one more thing to say. I wanted to give a shout out to all of MetaManiacs patrons on Patreon. It's humbling to see how many patrons we got in such a small amount of time, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to Dan. It means a lot to Jordan. It means a lot to Mike. It means a lot to Kevin. It's really cool. We really appreciate all the support that we've been seeing and all the vibes that we've gotten, because it's been nothing but good so far. You can hit us up on Patreon to get content exclusive updates, eventually a stronger portion of our podcast, the second half, sort of like a side talks where we mull that over. That's all being worked on. You can get shouted out at the end of the video like I'm about to do. And yeah, so if you're really enjoying it, give us a like, give us a sub. It means the world to me. And if you're feeling incredibly extra generous, $2 on Patreon. It goes to keeping the lights on and the servers running, and every single penny goes back into this. It goes back into making Final Fantasy TCG content, Dragon Ball Super content, Universes content. Other incredible TCGs, generally smaller, on the smaller end, that really need the support. So if you like what we do here, if you like this video, if you have any questions on the deck list, hit me up, hit us up. Facebook at MetaManiacs, MetaManiacs on Patreon, and Dillan Straube. But before I go, I wanted to give one special shout out to Jason Toro, who is he's a big fan of Final Fantasy TCG. You'll find him on the NA group, and he's an overall great guy, and he's an incredible patron that's just little extra special for a Final Fantasy. So I just want to thank everybody for joining me today and listening to what I'm sure is an incredibly long-winded deck list. Yeah, so from me to you, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're staying healthy. We love you. Like, share, subscribe. Have a good night.